As part of my postgraduate studies, I developed what I have called the cycle of teaching and learning. And within this cycle, I have included 4 fundamental phases that we need to observe. Just a note here, you will probably hear this term cycle of teaching and learning, and different educators or different researchers may explain that in different ways, and that's fine. Not a problem at all. In this case, the cycle of teaching and learning has 4 phases, and I will take you through the 4 phases now. So phase 1 is about data and evidence to inform teaching and learning. So of course you heard me before talk about data literacy and assessment literacy, and all that comes into play here. So essentially we are addressing 2 fundamental questions here. Who are my learners and what is their readiness to learn? So we use the data to gain knowledge of our learners in order to take action to ensure that learning happens for every learner. So what data is accessible to teachers in order to identify who are our learners and what their readiness to learn is? So readiness to learn and disposition data, we have student attitudes to school, and it's very important that when you look at the results of the student attitude to school, you also make sure that you have read and understood the questions that the students were asked before they responded. So what were the elements that created this particular data? And it's only then that you will be able to do an analysis of the data and appreciate it. So attitude to school, the pivot survey that the students do is very important to give us an understanding of students' dispositions and student readiness. And I've also provided a couple of reputable websites where you can go and familiarize yourself with them, and then you may wish to use them in your class to gather more data and evidence about your students' learning dispositions. The next set of data that you have available is demographic data. So when we talk about demographic data, Cases 21 gives you a little bit of a description, I guess, of the SFO. It tells you about the background of your students, maybe the language, their ethnic background, the economic background, and so forth. And that helps you because often we know that students come to school, and Hadi told us in his earliest research that 50% of what will happen at school students already bring with them. And I guess that demographic data might give you an insight into the kind of readiness that the students bring before they were in your classroom. Local council websites can give you a fair bit of data as well about, for example, things like home ownership, whether it's a transient population, whether students can access resources outside of their house, the employment situation of the population, and so forth. And the Bureau of Statistics is another site that you may wish to consider. So readiness to learn, the growth and achievement data is readily available to teachers as well. So here we need to be very clear about norm referenced assessments and criterion referenced assessments. So norm referenced assessment measures the students against everyone else who is the same age as them and has sat the same assessment tool as them. They provide information for readiness to learn across the curriculum, because the items for the norm-referenced assessments such as NAPLAN or ACER or On Demand are drawn from across the curriculum, and they address particular literacy and numeracy skills that are needed across the curriculum for learning. The next set of the assessment data, of course, is the criterion referenced assessment. This is the data that we create at school based on the tiered summative tasks that we provide for our students. Of course, the other assessment data that we have available to us is the formative assessment data, checking for understanding, tasks that we have and that we use during the learning process. So for teachers, what is important is that they question what sits behind that data. So NAPLAN tells me that a particular student is at a particular band. ACER tells me that a particular student has a particular STEM, and On Demand tells me that a particular student is at a particular value within an 11-point scale value. That in itself, whilst it's helpful as an entry point for the teachers, does not tell the teachers what they need to do to provide appropriate interventions or to select the appropriate teaching activities for their students. They need to know what sits behind the data. What will the how will evidence-based instruction support the students that we have to achieve growth irrespective of their point of entry. And that evidence-based instruction can only come through the analysis of the data that we have, and that we now, for example, that NAPLAN for the literacy assessment, NAPLAN tests for whether students can locate explicitly stated information, whether they can make straightforward inferences, whether they can interpret and integrate ideas and information, and whether they can examine and evaluate content, language, and textual elements. So what does that mean to each teacher? What does it mean to you? And what does it mean across the learning areas? This is what's going to make a difference in the way you plan for teaching and learning. And this is what will make a difference in the way you identify your learning needs in order to have the accurate intervention strategies to support every learner to learn. So the cognitive processes that assess these skills are locating and identifying information. And you will see from the description that although it appears to be an easy skill to have, it's actually not so easy, because it is affected by the difficulty of the item that the students have to identify, and also where that item might be. It requires the reader to scan, to read, to search for, and to locate the relevant information. So as you will see in the slides, which I like to respectfully invite you to read for yourselves, it is not an easy process and needs to be explicitly taught. So how will a teacher of science teach students how to identify explicitly stated information? How will they learn that in math, in English, in humanities, in physical education, and so forth? The next cognitive skill is in integrating and interpreting, and that is about students synthesizing information, tracking information between paragraphs, looking at identifying the coherence within each sentence or paragraph, excuse me, so that they can make sense of the text that they are reading. And interpreting and making meaning is, of course, making assumptions from explicitly stated information and information that is not there, so that they can infer about a particular meaning or a particular context that they are working within. The next skill is, of course, analyzing and evaluating. That's higher order thinking. It's critical literacy element. And so students need to draw information from within a text, but also across multiple texts and outside of the text in order to be able to make meaning of what it is that they're reading, or to address a particular concept or a particular problem that they have been asked to solve. So NAPLAN writing addresses the skills of audience, purpose and structure. Can the students write for a particular audience, having a particular purpose for the writing and using the appropriate structure to make sure that they meet the purpose and audience? Do they have sufficient vocabulary and content appropriate vocabulary, topic appropriate vocabulary, and also vocabulary that will allow the reader of the text they are composing to be able to do and to employ the comprehension skills we addressed in the previous slides. Can they achieve text cohesion so that a reader of their text can make sense of the text? Are they confident with sentence and clause level grammar so that their sentences being the smallest unit of a text, that they make complete meaning and allow the reader to make meaning of the text? Word level grammar, punctuation and spelling are also measured in the writing tests, because as we know, punctuation makes or breaks comprehension, and spelling is very important in order to aid communication. The NAPLAN numeracy test takes into consideration the proficiencies of mathematics, and it aims to assess whether a numerate person is able to interpret a situation as one in which mathematics is needed, choose the appropriate mathematics to use, apply a range of mathematical concepts, facts, procedures, and thinking and skills in order to interpret, apply, and evaluate mathematics outcomes. So in essence, it is how we use our mathematical knowledge to be able to address mathematical problems of practice in real life. So as I said before, it uses the lens of the proficiencies, the understanding of mathematics, the fluency within contexts of mathematics, the problem solving thinking of mathematics, and of course the reasoning required to reach a successful outcome in problem solving. Okay, so just to illustrate what we have been saying so far, if I am a teacher of civics and citizenship and I am just about to engage in teaching Band 5 to my students, and the content descriptor is asking me to teach my students to understand how to discuss the freedoms that enable active participation in Australia's democracy. In order for me to know how to utilize the appropriate literacy strategies so that my students have maximum opportunities for success, I need to know what kind of literacy is expected here. So here my students, for example, are expected to, because it says discuss the freedoms, discuss being the signal word here, students are expected to locate explicitly stated information. They are expected to make straightforward inferences from the information they will read, and they are expected to interpret and integrate ideas and information so that they can discuss the freedoms that enable active participation in Australia's democracy. So I guess knowing that and being cognizant that these are the literacy elements that will allow success, will then indicate to a teacher what kind of learning opportunities they need to design, what kind of activities they need to design, but more importantly, what do they need to learn as literacy learners themselves in order to be able to do that in their own subject with a particular class. Okay, so if we take a math example, so one of the content descriptors is asking students in year 9 to solve problems involving direct proportion. Here, because again it says to solve problems, and we know what problem solving in the proficiency of mathematics means, so they are asked to interpret and integrate ideas and information. Then they are asked to explore the relationship between graphs and equations. Okay, so now we know that the literacy required is that they are retrieving details and facts from within a written text. They made straightforward inferences. They examine and evaluate content, language, and textual elements. So when we are able to readily and confidently identify the cognitive demands, the literacy demands that are within the description and the level of complexity within the description of each of the standards, then we can confidently say that we are designing a curriculum that addresses the needs of all our students. Okay, you'll see the same in the visual arts example, with the term here, the signal word being analyzed. You'll see in green the literacy elements required here. And if you wanted to practice this, perhaps what you could do is choose one of your content descriptors and see if you can work collaboratively with someone, or have a go by yourself and then find a partner that you can seek feedback from as to whether you have been able to identify what literacy demands sit behind the standard or the content descriptors that you will be addressing in your next class. So in this slide, you are going to be listening to an architect describing how he designs for particular clients to ensure that the client needs are met and that the product of his design will bring satisfaction and joy to his clients. I guess what I'm attempting to do here is to use an analogy of teachers being architects for designing teaching and learning for particular students at a particular time and for a particular reason. And if you watch the video, perhaps you can see if you can draw some parallels between what we've said so far about designing for learning and what an architect does.
I'm an architect who loves to draw. My name is Barry Burkus. I'm in my studio in Santa Barbara, and we're going to look at a house that we designed and tell you how and why we designed the house the way it is. Clients came to us and they said, we want to build on the beach. We want to build in a place that has great ocean views. We want to build a house that allows us to bring our extended family home, but we want to have a place that's private for them also. So we looked at putting the living kitchen across the back to enjoy the view, the library to enjoy the view, a stairway that went upstairs so the master bedroom sat over the top of the kitchen area, and a guest room over the living room, and a bridge that connected that, and the guest over here, and actually another bridge that connected the guest to their own bedroom suites, which were over a motor court in the front. So as you start to, this becomes a house. It is a drawing that as you start to sketch, you draw a diagram, and the diagram becomes architecture. So what we were looking at, once again, was the ocean that ran along the area here. We're looking at, once again, winds that came from the west side over here, sun that came east and west. And we looked at the kitchen being on the morning side of the house. Always think about the kitchen enjoying east light. The sun is a wonderful thing to gain in the morning. In the afternoon, the warmth in the living room. And we looked at the house as around a courtyard, so that if the winds came, that we would end up being able to shelter the people around a fireplace in a courtyard that we came through from a motor court, which was the garages in front. So very simply then, this became the living room with a fireplace sitting in the floor, seating areas around the fireplace, the dining room in this area here, the kitchen that was back in this side of the house on the east side with sun coming in the morning, and the idea that the library on this edge of the house would enjoy the quiet, and we could block the west sun with that. But we're watching the beach, looking at the surf, looking at a pool that sits in the yard, and it became a place that water in an infinity pool poured over into the ocean visually, and then water in the front kept the acoustics that were from the noise of the road and the train away from the inners of the house. Enter here, look to light, look to the right, the library, a piano, look to the left, through the dining room towards the kitchen, views up and down the coast. But all houses that we work on become diagrams that are bubbles, then start to become harder lines, and the forms start to come together. And it's an exercise in thinking with the hand and the mind that will go from just a little bit more detailed than this to the computer, where it really becomes an organized piece put together by the designers that are working with me on the house. So it all begins as a pattern and a diagram. The idea of where things are and how they interrelate, adjacencies and the opportunities of the sun in the afternoon, the sun in the morning, the views to the water, and the idea that the bridge puts together the guest and the master, looking down into the wonderful views of the house. The people that have this house are wonderful clients, and it's a house that we are very, very proud of as architects. And that, I think, is the greatest reward an architect can have, is a happy client, a great building, and a place that they want to go back and visit because of the meaning of the piece that they've designed and the strength of the architecture.
We talked about NAPLAN, and we gave some examples of how the literacy skills that are tested in NAPLAN can be utilized to support student learning across the curriculum. If we now look at the numeracy as well, the numeracy skills that are tested by NAPLAN, I would like to invite you to be looking at your subjects and to see what numeracy elements are explicit in your subject, and how will you explicitly teach for those without relying perhaps that the students might be doing that in their math class at a particular time, to ensure that they can experience success in your own subject. The embedded documents in these slides have the particular numeracy that are required across the curriculum, and it also, in a table towards the end of that PDF, you will see what numeracy skills you need to be teaching at each year level in your subject to support the students to be successful with their learning in your subject. I'll leave that up to you to explore the following slides. So numeracy in the arts, numeracy in health and physical education, and to explore those in your own time, and to seek to improve your own knowledge and pedagogical toolbox with numeracy strategies. So once you have spent some time looking at the embedded PDFs and becoming more familiar with the numeracy demands within your subject, you will realize that reliable data and evidence is the responsibility of every school, but it's also the responsibility of every teacher. It is that reliable data and evidence that will allow us to design learning for the students we have. So what does the research tell us about all this? Research proposes 6 steps to effective data use. The first is determine what you want to know. So for example, I want to know whether my students have good spelling skills, but more specifically that they can do morphological and etymological spelling, because I'm a science teacher and I know that most of the words in science are morphologically and etymologically driven. Knowing that this is what I want to learn, I can go now to my NAPLAN and I can look at the spelling results. I can also look at my ASA, the vocabulary assessment, or I can simply design an assessment, vocabulary assessment for my own class, so that I can gather the evidence that I want, because I know exactly what I want. So then I collect and access the data and information that I want, and I analyze that. So if I did my own assessment and I gave my students 20 terms that included the most commonly used prefixes and suffixes in science, and from that I realized that the majority of my students do not know how to use those prefixes and suffixes, and as a result they misspell the words. I know then what to teach. So the analysis of the results will allow me to set priorities and set goals for teaching spelling in my science class. And I will then identify particular strategies. And if I don't know the strategies, then I will seek to improve my knowledge of spelling strategies that have to do with morphemic and etymological spelling. I will then follow up to see if the strategies that I put in place achieve the desired outcome by monitoring the growth of my students. Okay? So, as a result of using data to drive educational decision making, we have greater differentiation of instruction, because I know, in the example of science, what my students are lacking in. Not every student will be lacking in understanding of prefixes, and not every student will be lacking in the understanding of suffixes. So I'm able to differentiate based on the evidence I collected from the analysis of my data. I'll be able to have greater collaboration among staff, because I might seek the support of either the literacy leader or other colleagues within science who are doing this very well, or seek the collaboration of an expert who might be able to guide me in the right direction. And increase a sense of teacher efficacy. I will feel better about myself as a teacher, that I am achieving the outcomes that I have set for my students, and I'm supporting my students to actually grow in their learning. And also improved identification of students' learning needs. I will know better how to identify the needs of my students. Okay, so we are about to start phase 2, and the next presentation will describe how we map the essential learning in our college.